Says it's targeting a vast network of militant tunnels, bringing the front lines closer to dense civilian areas. Gaza's health ministry says the death toll has climbed to 109 Palestinians, including 28 children and 15 women. 7 people have been killed in Israel, including a 6-year-old boy. Residents of northern Gaza have reported heavy artillery fire and dozens of airstrikes, while according to the Associated Press, Hamas has fired 1,800 rockets into Israel. The rockets have brought life in parts of Israel to a standstill, as it also deals with the worst Jewish-Arab violence seen within the country in decades. Daniela Cheslow is AFP's Jerusalem reporter. She says the situation on the ground is unclear, with confusing messaging from Israel.
My colleagues in Gaza are seeing hundreds of people fleeing their homes to escape Israeli fire. And with all the rockets coming in, flights to the Tel Aviv airport have been canceled or diverted away. The U.S. State Department raised its travel advisory for Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza on yesterday. And the Pentagon says it's airlifted about 120 personnel out of the country. The Israelis have called up 9,000 reservists, and they say that they are attacking in Gaza because Hamas has been firing rockets. Hamas and other militant groups in Gaza have been firing rockets into Israel, nearly 2,000 by the Army's last publication. And Israelis say that is making life inside Israel impossible. There are people who have been killed. One 6-year-old boy was killed by a rocket that entered his home in Sderot, the southern border town. But these airstrikes and other strikes in Gaza have been punishing. In some cases, entire families have been wiped out. We heard of a family where it was a father, a pregnant mother, and 4 children. So the civilian casualties in Gaza have been high. Israel says that it struck 80 or 90 militants. Hamas has admitted that a few dozen of its militants have been killed, although it contests the number that Israel is putting forward, and more than 24 children in Gaza have died as a result of the strikes. The Israelis are leveling entire buildings. We've heard of at least 3 high-rise buildings where the Israeli army says they often call people inside to warn them so that they won't be killed in strikes that are targeted at Hamas infrastructure. However, you're still seeing sometimes, towers more than 10 stories high just coming down. There have been solidarity protests among Arab citizens of Israel. They make up a 20% minority, and often those protests have escalated into clashes with police. We've also seen vigilante Jewish forces, or vigilante Jewish civilian groups coming through Arab towns, and there have been at times mob attacks that have left people going to hospital from both sides. Yesterday, for example, I went to the town of Bat Yam, just south of Tel Aviv, and there I met the Arab owners of an ice cream store that had been completely, the glass of the building had been shattered by a crowd. The store had been vandalized, and it was part of this eruption of very intimate sectarian violence that has left synagogues burned, mosques targeted, cars torched. Inside Israel, this has been some of the worst violence in at least 20 years.
These are live pictures of the Gaza skyline. For now, there's an uneasy silence above Israel and the Palestinian territories. Overnight, the bombardment continued in both Gaza and Israel, with some rockets falling in the coastal city of Ashkelon, which is 50 kilometres south of Tel Aviv. While in Gaza, Médecins Sans Frontières says medical workers are taking incredible risks to treat the hundreds of injured. The United Nations Security Council will meet on Sunday about the escalating situation in the Middle East. Australia's Foreign Minister Marise Payne has urged an immediate stop to the violence.
The Australian Government has issued a clear statement about our deep concerns at the escalating violence in Israel, Gaza and the West Bank. We have unequivocally called on all leaders to take immediate steps to halt violence, to maintain restraint and to restore calm. Our strong view is that violence is no solution. No solution. Whether they are rocket attacks or indiscriminate acts that fuel the cycle of violence and bloodshed, they are also never justified. We have urged all parties to refrain from violent or provocative acts, calling for a halt to any actions that increase tensions. And if there is a discussion to be held at the United Nations, then Australia will be an active participant.
The US President Joe Biden says he wants to see a significant reduction in rocket attacks. He sent an envoy to the Middle East to urge for calm.
I have my intelligence community, the Defense Department, as well as the State Department, have been in contact with all of their counterparts not only in Israel, but in the region. And one of the things that I have seen thus far is that there has not been a significant overreaction. The question is how we get to a point where they get to a point where there is a significant reduction in the attacks, particularly the rocket attacks that are indiscriminately fired into population centers. But I expect I'll be having some more discussions. And we haven't just spoken with the Israelis, with the Egyptians, the Saudi, and others. So it's a work in progress right now.
And the ABC online news team has put together a piece explaining the latest developments in the Gaza conflict. It goes through the historical background as well as more recent conflicts. That's on our website, news.abc.net.au. Back home, a man who murdered a woman before going on a knife-wielding rampage in Sydney CBD has been jailed for 44 years. Myrtney killed Michaela Dunn before seriously injuring another woman almost 2 years ago. Reporter Mark Reddy has more.
The judge described it as a cruel and brutal attack made for no reason when he sentenced Myrtney to 44 years behind bars with a non-parole period of 33 years. The 22-year-old stared at the ground and shielded his face from Michaela Dunn's mother, Joanne, as she wept in the public gallery when the judge decided against imposing a life sentence, given Myrtney's poor mental health contributed to his horrific crimes. The court heard Myrtney had all the hallmarks of a terrorist during his violent rampage throughout Sydney CBD in August 2019, but the judge ruled it was more about attracting police attention that he wanted to be killed by officers.
On 13 August 2019, he took on the trappings, gestures and language of a terrorist. And in the apartment, after carrying out the murder of Miss Dunn, and in the streets of Sydney, all who saw him would be forgiven for concluding that he was a fixated person with a commitment to a terrorist cause involving violent jihad. However, the evidence does not support such a conclusion.
The judge said Ney had every intention to kill Michaela Dunn when he booked her for sex in her Clarence Street apartment, labelling it a brutal and savage attack, and that he was completely devoid of natural human sympathy or regret. The victim's sister spoke outside court.
I'm not angry because there's no point in being angry, but I'm really, really frustrated. I'm frustrated with the system. There were so many times that could have and should have stopped what happened on the day that Mickey died.
Michaela's family and friends wore sunflowers in memory of their loved one. Outside court, Ney's mother and two sisters had nothing to say. The judge said Ney's prospects for rehabilitation were bleak in the extreme. He will be eligible for parole in 2052.
The head of the neo-Nazi group National Socialist Network, Thomas Sewell, has been arrested in a counter-terrorism raid on his Melbourne home. The 28-year-old and a 22-year-old man were arrested early this morning at his home in Melbourne's east. The pair are being questioned over an alleged violent armed robbery in the Cathedral Range State Park last Saturday, but no charges have been laid. A national counter-terrorism investigation is underway into the extremist group, with raids carried out recently in 3 states, leading to members being arrested. The boss of Racing New South Wales has lost a defamation case